What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Sarah with Sirens Books, and today we're doing a July reading wrap-up. So in the month of July, I read 11 books, predominantly ebooks and physical books, with a couple audiobooks thrown in. So let's just jump into it. So the first 5 books that I read in the month of July was actually the first 5 books in the Throne of Glass series, which was starting with Assassin's Blade and then through Queen of Shadows. Starting with the Assassin's Blade, which I prefer to read Throne of Glass in chronological order as opposed to the romantic order or the publication order, simply because I feel like Assassin's Blade is a really good book to introduce you to the character of Selena Sardothien. I really feel like that book informs the reader of the type of character we're dealing with. Following Assassin's Blade, I then read Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, which again follows Selena Sardothien in Rifthold as she battles to become the King's Champion. And then, of course, the next 2 books in the Throne of Glass series is going to be Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows. I read these back to back. I really enjoyed Heir of Fire just because of the shift in the tone of the series. You actually really start to see some of the characters come into their own. The stakes are a bit higher, and the pacing, I feel like, in these books are a lot better. We also meet a host of new characters, which is really fun. Those 2 books, I feel like once you get out of Rifthold, which is predominantly where Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight take place, and you kind of get a little bit better idea of the world that we're dealing with. Once the stakes are raised, it really becomes a very fun series to read. Probably one of my favorite series of all time. Of these 5 books, Queen of Shadows was my favorite. I believe that's the first 5 stars that I give to this book series, just because of all the different events that happened. But I do have 2 other videos. I started rereading this series predominantly because my best friend started reading it, and I wanted to reread it so that I could kind of, as a refresher for the whole series. We have 2 other videos that are posted on this channel, full thoughts and spoilers abound. But those are the first 5 books that I read in July. They were all rereads, but very enjoyable, and highly suggest that to any of my followers. So the first book that I read in July that was not a reread and not Sarah J. Maas was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This book is a Knights of the Round Table retelling, and I figured, what is a better time than right before I go to England? So this book follows Bree, who just started college at the University of Carolina following the death of her mother. And there she actually runs into some demon hunters who are all descendants of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. That's really where our story begins. From there, Bree realizes that the people in the secret society might know or have had something to do with the death of her mother. So she infiltrates the secret society to begin to figure out who might have been responsible for the death of her mother, and that's really where things kind of get crazy. It's a wonderful YA fantasy. I really enjoyed the magic system that was built here. There's a couple twists in there, even though some of them are a little bit predictable. And of course, with the ending, I will be picking up Bloodmark as soon as possible because I am dying to figure out what happens next. I started this book right before I went on vacation and then finished it while I was there. It's a phenomenal read. I highly suggest it. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of July was an ebook that I downloaded from Kindle Unlimited, and that was Mile High. This book follows the story of Xander and Stevie. Xander is a pro hockey player, and Stevie works for the team as a flight attendant. Stevie, for her part, absolutely refuses to date any more pro athletes after the heartbreak that she had to deal with her ex and him not believing that she was enough. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and it ranks about a 2 out of 3 on the spicy meter. This book was just okay. I didn't particularly like some of the tropes and how they were written. This is a forced proximity workplace romance, but it's also like a forbidden workplace romance. I had a hard time with this book just because I didn't really think that the chemistry between Xander and Stevie felt believable. It was almost like a switch flipped, and all of a sudden she went from being super annoyed with him to just thinking that his antics were cute. And I'm not really sure like when that happened. For me personally, I'm not going to continue on with the series, and this isn't really a book that I'd highly recommend. But if you're in your hockey romance era, this might speak to you a little bit differently than me. The next book that I read in July is Done and Dusted. This book follows Clementine, aka Emmy Ryder, and Luke Brooks. Done and Dusted is a brother's best friend forbidden romance. She comes back home after a catastrophic accident while riding a horse, and she's trying to figure out what she's going to do next. And Luke, who's known her his whole life, essentially, almost reads like an insta-love, but I feel like I was willing to forgive it just because they do have that history there from having grown up together. And they're also very supportive of each other. And he basically literally gets her back on the horse, and things go from there. I'm definitely still in my small town cowboy romance era with this one. I thought it was really cute. I really liked the two characters and how they interact with each other. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and it rates between a 1 and 2 out of 3 on the spicy meter. The next book I read in July is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I don't know why or what inspired me to read 2 lighthearted romance books and followed up with this one. This book, I'm still having trouble putting it into accurate words. The themes are a bit melancholy, but I would definitely say that its view of grief, how we deal with grief, how we deal with death, and it's very interesting, very well done, beautifully written. But essentially, after archaeologists discover a plague in a melting glacier that then ravages the world, this story follows different characters through the centuries. This book kind of reminds me of what would happen if Prometheus, Black Mirror, The Twilight Zone had a baby and then told the story as an ensemble cast. Each chapter is a different story by different characters. The author was definitely not worried about getting weird with some things. And I was actually surprised at how emotionally compelling this book was. I really enjoyed it. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend it for anybody that's a sci-fi girly. It's a fascinating read, to say the least, but I only read this about a week ago, and I'm still trying to get my thoughts together around it. The next book that I read in the month of July was The Space Between by Sarah Reddy. This book follows Jace and Andrea over almost a 20-year span from the time that they meet. Jace and his family start a band. They end up getting very popular and going on tour, and Andrea wants to go with him. Andrea is from a different background than Jace, so her parents don't approve of them going, and basically decides to give up her inheritance and risk it all for the man that she loves. But through miscommunication, things don't work out, and then we get some time jumps to where Andrea ends up over the years, as well as Jace. I like this book. I wasn't really a fan of the pacing in it. I thought some of the stories were a little bit drawn out. I did like how everything kind of came back together in the end. We saw some really good character arcs and character redemptions. But this is not a lighthearted romance book, which is what I was thinking it was. It definitely has some heavier themes. If you're interested in reading this book, I would check trigger warnings. So I gave The Space Between 3.5 stars, but it is not a spicy read at all. So it's 0 out of 3 on the spicy scale. So the last book that I read in July was Fractal Noise by Christopher Paolini. I hope I said that right. I really enjoy To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, so whenever I saw that Fractal Noise was coming out, I put it on my Libby wish list, and specifically the audiobook. I would really suggest that because I feel like the audiobook, specifically with the themes in this book, helped build the suspense that was written in the story. But overall, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. So 4 volunteers in Fractal Noise go onto a planet as an exploratory mission, and things don't exactly go as planned. And really, the story is just kind of depressing. The ending is kind of obscure, which I believe is the intention of the author there. because it's obscure and open ending, it's also not very satisfying. It's probably one of my least favorite books that I read this month. Okay, so that's everything. Thank you for joining me. Those are all the books that I read in July. If you made it this far in the video, leave a stack of books in the comments, and thanks for watching. Bye.